Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am so glad on this episode to be talking with a returning guest. Always glad to have folks come back. And that guest happens to be Mr. Mike Collins, who has, I believe, the same Batman mug that I do, actually.
I have indeed, and thank you for having me back.
My pleasure. Anytime, anytime. The last time we talked, we did sort of an overview of your work and talked in some broad strokes, but I thought today we would talk a little bit about comics and film, and particularly adaptations of film and television in comics, because you've done a good number of those projects.
Yeah,
Yeah. Uh,
absolutely. Let's go.
great, great. Babylon 5, Star Trek being a couple of those, as well as Doctor Who, Superman Returns. Did I miss any links there between comics and film?
There was a cartoon film called Quest for Camelot that I did a comic strip adaptation for,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and I'm sure there's something else as well I've done. No, it'll come back to me.
Yeah, yeah,
Over the years, I've done very, very many projects, so
yeah, yeah.
sometimes I forget what I've drawn.
I remember Quest for Camelot. I do remember that one. Curious because I know you've created in television and film worlds, what you see as the links between and maybe some of the differences between working in film and working in comics.
Well, it gets back to that whole difference about what comics are and what film and TV are. And the thing is that comics is a static medium
Hmm, hmm.
in which you can have images of any size and shape. Movies and TV are a fluid moving medium in which you can't change the shape of the image.
Hmm.
That proscenium arch of your TV screen or the movie screen, apart from sometimes when you get a film like Life of Pi, where they make a deal out of the fact that they can change the ratio, is that basically whatever story you're telling has to be told within that space.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and it's one of the things I found working in doing comic strip adaptation. So something like Babylon 5, which I don't know if you know, but the miniseries that I drew in Valen's name was actually originally an unshot episode of season 4 of Babylon 5.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we actually had JMS's script to do as a comic. So the
Not
script
bad.
was full of all references to, panel F, do this, and it's like, well, I can't do that. So I found a way of doing that in the comic format. So, there's a sequence in, I think it's issue 1 or issue 2, where they go to Babylon 4, which has reappeared. And the idea is they've walked down a small tunnel. And in the script, uh, uh, what Joe's got is this the camera pulls way back to reveal the center of Babylon 4. Now, I can't do that because physically, the artwork on the page, much as you might love it, ain't moving anywhere.
Hmm. Hmm.
But what I came up with as a way of dealing with that was that it was lucky that the page which led up to it was a right hand page. So on that right hand page, I did a lot of really tight, intense frames. So you got this sense of enclosure, you got this sense of claustrophobia of small spaces. And then the last frame was, I think it was the captain looking out and seeing the thing. And then as you turn the page over, you then had that frame repeated very small at the top of the page. And then the rest of the page was indeed that camera, you know, pulls right back and shows the interior. So
Hmm.
you were with the characters. And so you had the whole scale of the characters and the scale of the environment they were in. And then suddenly you get this big space. So hopefully in your head, and that's the best thing about comics. I mean, for me, comics are about making you believe the images do move, even
Yeah.
when they don't. The best thing about a Jack Kirby comic or a Gil Kane comic or a Jim Starlin comic is the whole time is the artwork is so kinetic that in your head it's moving. I always say that the Spider Verse movies are the first time I've ever seen on screen what comics look like in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that sense of action and movement and design, and just being thrilled by every image. It's the sort of thing I try to get across in the comics when I'm doing Star Trek and Doctor Who, is to get that sense of scale the whole time, to get you believe that, oh my god, this is this. Um, The example I always give when I talk about this in schools or in colleges, the moment where it really hit me how this works is Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what Spielberg had to get you to believe at the end of that movie was there was this giant, like the size of several football fields put together, spaceship.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he did that is all the way through the movie, he kept showing you Devil's Tower. So this natural outcrop called Devil's Tower. And you see a reporter there, and you see the reporter with this massive tower behind her, and then you see a little car in between them. So you go, oh my God, Devil's Tower is really big.
Uh,
And you're not thinking that in the front of your brain, but it's in the back of your brain.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And every so often you'll get these shots of Devil's Tower. And so basically he's like nudging you saying, this is big. This is really big.
Yeah.
You cannot believe just how big this thing is. It's this mountain. It's actual mountain. So that when at the end of the movie, the mothership turns up and it's behind the mountain and it's 3 times the width of that mountain, in your head, you've already done the math. You already know how big Devil's Tower is because of everything you've seen in context. So a spaceship that's 3 times the size of it, oh my God. And you completely believe that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's used images to tell that story to sort of get you to believe a certain thing about this, the environment. And
Yeah.
having this model, and it wasn't a small model they had of a mothership either, but this model that you then see rise up behind this mountain, you're literally knocked up, off your chair because this thing is huge.
Yeah.
And I try to get that across in my comic stuff as well, because I've also looked at that for me is one of those defining moments. And you say artists sort of find certain things in their lives, they go, that's it, I understand this now. That was the moment for me where I just thought, oh yeah, that's what
Yeah.
that's about.
Has there been a time that you've pulled a visual cue into the comic from something sort of film referenced, and it's one of those moments where it's like, yes, this is working. This is exactly what I was trying to pull off visually.
There was a Doctor Who story that I wrote and drew for Doctor Who magazine, uh, um, called The Instruments of War, which was me sort of getting a little bit fancy about the idea of things being orchestrated and the idea of war being orchestrated, and the central character in it was somebody that was an ex-musician that ended up in the German army, and so you've got this like double play on what have you. And in that, I did that game again. So I had this thing that was being built by aliens in the middle of the desert outside Morocco, and to get that sense of scale, I have lots of British and German planes flying around, which I try to get as accurate as possible, so that when they're in front of it and it's huge behind them,
Hmm.
then yeah, you get that you get that sort of sense of, oh good lord, that's huge. So it's playing with that sort of stuff all the time. I love it. I one of my favorite comic covers of all time is the first Commandy, where you've got
Hmm.
Commandy in the raft and you've got the Statue of Liberty in the water.
Hmm.
And it's just like, oh my God, this is something I know. I know the Statue of Liberty, and it's in the water, and suddenly it's all wrong, but you immediately identify with that. And I think the best comics um, are the ones that make you believe what you're looking at. You've got that sense that this is a real thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
in the wrong context, and if it's in the wrong context, oh my God, what's happened here? I love that sort of stuff, and that's one of the things I always try to get my artwork. I try to get that sort of, a slight sense of credibility to what I'm drawing. If it's like in one of the Doctor Who magazine stories, we had a Santaran mining operation on an alien world. Well, I went off and I found loads of photographs of oil rigs.
Hmm. Hmm.
So even though I was doing something fantastical and something alien, there was enough about it that you could recognize to say, I know what this structure is and I believe this structure is real.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things you can do in comics a lot if you sort of have that. It's having that sense of this is a real thing and oh my God, what's happened to it? Or this is a real thing in the future, but I know what it is because I recognize it from my life.
Yeah.
Not that I've
Yeah.
been on many oil rigs, but you know what they look like. So
Yeah, yeah. Has there been a time that you've been on a project and maybe there was a difference, maybe something changed in the process of the production, and or you didn't have information that you needed, and so you sort of had to improv as a creator?
Uh, funny if this is the storyboarding side of my career. Quite often when I come on board to storyboard an episode of a TV show,
Hmm.
whether it's Doctor Who or whatever, um, the secondary cast have normally not been cast at that point. So if, say, there's 4 or 5 characters that are going to keep turning up on our storyboards and the actors haven't been hired yet,
Hmm.
what I tend to do, and always make a point of saying, this is just for the boards, is I will make up like a character sheet of these secondary characters. So I just say, like, what this guy looks like, this is what Fred looks like, this is what Bert looks like, this is what Sid looks like in my boards. Doesn't matter who you cast, but in my boards, you'll always recognize them as being like this. So,
Yeah.
so even though it looks completely different when it airs because it's real people, at least in the boards, there's a logical consistency to the work. So I always go with that. So quite often when I send the boards in, I'll send in loads of, not necessarily turnarounds, but certainly headshots of all the characters as I see them in my head.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
funny if they look anything like what I've done.
I think I have one more official question, and then if there's something that I've missed in the world of film and comics, by all means, please tag it in. I'm sure I've missed a lot. I always like to, as one of the last things, give space to talk about any current projects, anything that you want to mention, as well as spaces where people can connect if they didn't hear it the first time through in our talk.
um, oh, I'm trying to think. I mean, probably the big project I'm working on at the moment still hasn't been announced, so I can't talk about it. You'll have to come
Always
back
fun.
in 6 months. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk about it then. But I can talk around it, and it's, for me, one of the things I love most about doing comics is telling stories,
Hmm.
and they don't just have to be superhero stories or romance stories or war stories. They can be stories that can educate. So, like I did A Christmas Carol, and what I loved about that was that A Christmas Carol is actually only about 70 pages long. It's a novella, it's not a novel.
Hmm. Hmm.
Everybody says, oh, it's a big long book, and it's not. And it's why it's adapted so well to movies. It's because it is actually the right length of story for a movie. Um, because it is only, that's so many beats in the story. So when we got to do the comic strip adaptation, right, which was about, good Lord, what, about 8, 9 years ago? Ooh, maybe even more. Oh, good Lord. This is probably quite more than 10 years ago, anyway. What we had there was 130, 120, 130 pages. So we
Hmm.
had a 70-page novel we could tell in 130 pages. So it was great for me as an artist because I got to do loads of research. So when you read Dickens' book, he references a certain type of fireplace that Scrooge was sitting in front of when the ghosts arrived. And so I went off and I found what that particular fireplace was, and it was a real fireplace. And it had certain tiles on it. And so I got the right tiles there. I found out what the right ink well was for Scrooge's desk. So stuff like that, I got deeply into it. And one of the other things I did with Christmas Carol as well is that I wanted the graphic novel to sort of reflect on not just the original book, but the various versions that we know of that story. So it
Hmm.
was like almost like a meta adaptation of Christmas Carol. So if you go through the comic, there are locations from the Alistair Sim version, from the George C. Scott version, from not the Kelsey Grammer version because that's horrible, but, but there's the 1930s version as well, which I got some really nice reference from. Which, if you ever see it, it's almost like a Fritz Lang weird German expressionist version of it, which is great. I can't remember who actually directed it. Um, and of course, the absolute perfect Christmas Carol adaptation, which is the Muppets Christmas Carol, which is unbelievably the closest to the book of any of them. Which it still boggles my mind. So in fact, there are a couple of Muppets in the comic, and there's an alleyway down by Scrooge's house, which turns up in the movie, which turns up in the comic book. So
Nice,
I like
nice.
getting that sort of thing into it, getting that, as you say, it's adapting between mediums, but it's also respecting other versions of it that have existed. And I
Hmm.
like that sort of aspect of the work. So the project I'm working on at the moment, shall I say, I'll talk about later, historically later, um, is actually adaptation of a textbook,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's a
Interesting.
textbook that's done as a novel. and that's all I'll say about it. And for me, that's great because it means that people that have read that book can reference it in a comic, but see it in a new context. And people that haven't got time or haven't got the inclination to read that text will be able to read that as a comic. So
Mhm.
it's an easy in. What I loved about doing the Christmas Carol is that the guy that set the company up, um, Chris Bryant had Clive Bryant, sorry, had this great idea that he wanted to get kids reading. And he said one of the problems is if you've got a Shakespeare play and you're reading a Shakespeare play in school, you're not getting the experience of that
True. True.
because the people that read that play are the people that are then going to act that play.
Hmm.
It's an instruction for how things are going to happen. So by doing it as a comic book, you're actually getting that action out there. You're actually getting the images realized, the scenes in Macbeth with the witches. You can read about that, but if you've got a picture of the witches, then okay, I get what this is now. And I think Clive did a brilliant job in getting a lot of British comic artists involved in doing really, really good adaptations of Shakespeare, of Dickens, of um, I'll tell you that one of the single best ones is the Wuthering Heights one that John M. Burns drew.
Hmm.
That is magnificent. And if you know Wuthering Heights, the book, it's a great adaptation. If you don't know it, it's the way that's going to make you want to read that book after you've read the comic.
Yeah. Yeah. Love when that happens and when media works together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that as well. It's always a stepping stone to something more that you okay, I'm now in this area and I like this. I want to find out more about this. So I'd like to think that the stuff that I've done over the years has been part of that. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's part of the power of storytelling, and getting to see different visions and different approaches is part of the beauty of it as well.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love reading adaptations of books that people do because I've got a shelf which is just um, Frankenstein and Dracula. But I've got so many different versions. So, American versions, British versions, a lot of European versions. And it's just these stories that you know so well. I've seen them told in different ways by different artists because they brought their own sensibility to it. Is fantastic. That's like an experience in itself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's always interesting too when you become acquainted with a version and you know it well, and then you go back to the source material and you realize, oh, there were major differences here. This is not what I expected.
Yeah. Well, do you realize that getting back to Christmas Carol, that the least accurate version of Christmas Carol is actually the Alistair Sim version? There's like a whole middle section in that movie, which is great and it's lovely, but it's not in the book at all.
Right. Yeah.
They just put it into the movie to make it a longer movie and to make the story work better. But yeah, so that's again, the Muppets is the most accurate version.
Well, hat tip to the Muppets. Love it. Anything else that you want to mention before we close out the episode?
Trying to think of anything else. Um, no, I mean, I'm just in a really good place right now where I am getting to draw and sometimes write material in comic strip form or storyboards for TV, where I get to tell stories, and
Yeah.
I love that, and particularly the telling stories in pictures. I mean, funnily enough, for all things I've done over the years, the thing that actually is the most high profile I've worked on, and I hadn't appreciated this at the time, is the recent Netflix adaptation of the Harlan Coben book, Fool Me Once.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I worked on that for several months, but because we were still sort of like at the very end of COVID and COVID restrictions, so it's only like in the last year that we've stopped having to have COVID tests every day when you go on set.
Hmm.
It really is, when the rest of the world is going, oh, it's fine, it's fine. TV and movie companies have been going, no, 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 it's not. We don't want our actors sick, so they carry on doing all the testing. So I
Yeah.
didn't actually get to work on set with that. I worked with a director who was up in Manchester over Zoom all the time. So to me, it was just another little project. So seeing it come on Netflix and suddenly it's like the biggest show in the world was just extraordinary.
Yeah.
But that was a great experience as well. An interesting thing about that is there's a couple of sequences in that where the director had a particular story he wanted to tell, and the money men were like, "Oh, I'm not sure if we can do this." So the way he did it, which I thought was wonderful, was that he just went, let's go over the top.
Mhm,
Let's
mhm.
build like the most expensive sequence we can have, and then we'll get it to what we want.
Love it. Love
So say, well, you can't have that, but you can have this. And you go, okay, that's basically how we did it.
it.
Because my budget's unlimited. It's pencil and paper. But
Yeah. When you have to build the spaceship that's 3 times the size,
there
that
we go.
that
Yep.
takes a little bit. Yeah. 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 Well, important visual work too, and thinking about building suspense and the ways that things appear on screen in panels. So the production companies are lucky to have you to help them bring the vision to life.
I appreciate that. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you for a wonderful second talk, and glad to have you back anytime to talk about projects as they come to be.
Thank you very much. And as I say, when that project's announced properly, I'll be able to discuss it in more detail. And it's something that I have no connection to personally.
Mhm.
It's fascinating to work on. I'll say that.
Wonderful. Looking forward to seeing it, looking forward to hearing more about it, and talk again soon.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.